A boy said, "My dad has a mark just like yours," leaving the wealthy man startled. "Hello and welcome. Enjoy the story, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications." It was an evening of elegance and splendor, a gala designed to dazzle. The venue was a masterpiece, with crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, their glow scattering shimmering reflections across velvet-covered walls. The tables were meticulously arranged, featuring exquisite floral arrangements in shades of gold and cream, complemented by fine porcelain and gleaming silverware. Crystal glasses caught the warm light, occasionally clinking as elegantly dressed guests toasted and mingled. In the center of this sophisticated scene was Alejandro, a man whose quiet charm and magnetic presence drew people in effortlessly. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit paired with a crisp white shirt and a simple black tie, a classic look that exuded timeless elegance. As the evening's host, Alejandro moved through the room with practiced grace. Yet, despite his polite smiles and cordial words, his mind seemed elsewhere, as if searching for something unknown. For Alejandro, wealth was never the ultimate goal. It was a means to support his charitable endeavors, a purpose that brought him fulfillment amidst an otherwise hollow feeling that lingered within him. As he shook hands and exchanged pleasantries, he couldn't escape the sense that, despite his fortune, something essential was still missing. That night, however, a strange anticipation gnawed at him, a feeling that something unexpected might happen. Seeking a moment of reprieve from the formalities, Alejandro slipped away from the crowd and retreated to a quieter corner of the venue, where the music softened and the lively chatter became a faint murmur. It was there, by a large window, that he noticed a small figure. A boy, around 8 years old, stood gazing up at the star-filled sky, his eyes wide with wonder. The boy seemed oblivious to the grandeur around him, immersed in his own thoughts, far removed from the formalities of the event. His attire, though modest and unassuming, carried an air of quiet dignity. Intrigued by the boy's solitary presence, Alejandro approached quietly, careful not to disturb the moment. Something about the scene struck him as unusual, as though this encounter might hold an answer to questions he hadn't yet formed. When he drew closer, Alejandro saw the boy's expression, serene yet intensely focused, his gaze following the stars as though he understood their secrets. The depth of the boy's focus was extraordinary, and Alejandro couldn't help but feel drawn in. Smiling gently, he broke the silence. "The stars are beautiful, aren't they?" The boy, startled at first, turned toward Alejandro with curious, bright eyes. A shy smile flickered across his face before his curiosity took over. After a moment's pause, he replied softly, "They're incredible. It's amazing to think that some of these stars might not exist anymore, but their light still reaches us, traveling across the universe." Alejandro blinked, surprised by the boy's profound response. What seemed like an ordinary child was quickly proving to be anything but. Intrigued, Alejandro crouched slightly to meet the boy's gaze and asked, "How do you know that? Do you enjoy learning about space?" The boy nodded enthusiastically. Introducing himself as Diego, he explained his fascination with the stars and planets, sharing how he loved to read about the mysteries of the cosmos. He dreamed of becoming a scientist, exploring space, and uncovering the unknown. Alejandro listened intently, captivated by Diego's genuine passion. The way the boy spoke, with energy and sincerity, made every word feel alive. It was as if, in those moments, Diego transformed from a child into a visionary, someone capable of seeing far beyond the horizon. "I often wonder," Diego continued, turning his gaze back to the sky, "is someone out there, somewhere far away, looking at us and wondering the same things? Are we alone?" The simplicity of Diego's question struck Alejandro deeply. Though spoken with childlike innocence, it carried a weight that Alejandro couldn't ignore. After a moment of reflection, he replied softly, "Maybe not, Diego. Maybe someone out there is looking at us with the same curiosity." Diego smiled, as though Alejandro's words confirmed something he had long believed. In that smile, Alejandro felt an inexplicable connection, a shared moment of understanding that transcended words, a connection to the mysteries of the universe, the quest for answers, and the solitude that often accompanies such questions. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Alejandro asked, his voice tinged with both curiosity and nostalgia, as though reflecting on his own forgotten dreams. Diego's answer came without hesitation. "I want to be someone who helps others understand the universe, someone who can explain what people don't see. I want to ask the right questions, because that's how we discover things." Hearing those words, Alejandro was transported to his own childhood, when he was filled with dreams and boundless curiosity. Diego's determination and sincerity reminded him of what it felt like to envision the future with unshakable clarity. Alejandro smiled warmly, though a touch of melancholy crept into his heart, a reminder of dreams he had once left behind. What impressed him most wasn't just Diego's curiosity. It was the boy's unique presence. In a room filled with polished, sophisticated adults, Diego stood apart, existing in his own rhythm and perspective. Alejandro knew that this kind of depth and authenticity was rare, especially in someone so young. There was something extraordinary about Diego, something Alejandro couldn't fully explain, but it stirred in him a protective, almost admiring feeling. Finally, Diego turned to Alejandro and asked with innocent curiosity, "Do you like the stars too?" Alejandro nodded, and in that simple exchange he realized Diego brought Alejandro a spark of something he hadn't sought in years, a genuine connection, free of ulterior motives or hidden agendas. It was something honest and pure, like the light of stars crossing the vast universe just to brighten a single moment, an unexpected meeting. Alejandro smiled as he observed the boy, whose small frame held dreams as vast as the cosmos. There was an almost magical quality in the way Diego viewed life, and it deeply moved him. Alejandro realized that amidst all the wealthy and influential guests at the event, the most captivating presence was this boy with shining eyes and a mind as expansive as the universe he admired. Placing a hand gently on Diego's shoulder, Alejandro said in a warm but serious tone, "Diego, I believe you'll achieve great things. You have something extraordinary, and it's not just your knowledge about stars and planets. It's your ability to ask the right questions." Diego glanced downward, shy but unable to hide his smile. That small flicker of pride and joy lit up his face, and Alejandro felt a pang of tenderness. He realized that, for all his curiosity and intelligence, Diego was still a child, a boy craving recognition from someone who truly believed in him. "Do you really think so, Alejandro?" Diego asked, his voice filled with hope, his wide eyes reflecting a mix of disbelief and excitement. "Absolutely," Alejandro replied with sincerity. "And let me tell you a secret. I think you and I have more in common than you might think." Diego chuckled softly, not entirely grasping Alejandro's meaning, but feeling at ease in his presence. At that moment, the rigid formality of the event faded away. For those few minutes, it wasn't a man and a child, but two friends reconnecting as if after a long time apart. Alejandro felt compelled to do something more, as though this moment demanded a promise, a bond to seal their connection. Without overthinking it, Alejandro leaned in and said softly, "Diego, what would you say if I asked us to be friends?" Diego's eyes widened in surprise, but soon a wide, heartfelt smile spread across his face. To him, those words carried immense meaning. He could feel that Alejandro was genuine, that this wasn't just a polite gesture. Alejandro truly wanted to be part of his life. "Friends? Of course, Alejandro," Diego responded with childlike enthusiasm, extending his small hand to seal their pact. Alejandro took the boy's hand, squeezing it gently as though cementing an unspoken, eternal promise. They both laughed, and in that moment, something profound and authentic formed between them. But as Diego extended his hand, a detail caught Alejandro's attention. A small birthmark on Diego's wrist, nearly identical to one Alejandro had in the same place. The mark was subtle but distinctive, a detail that had always felt unique to him. Alejandro froze for a moment, his thoughts swirling. Diego noticed Alejandro's gaze and pointed at the mark on his wrist, saying casually, "My dad has one just like this. He always says it's a lucky sign." Alejandro smiled, though a quiet unease crept into his thoughts. What were the odds? Was this mere coincidence? Or was there something deeper at play? He couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter and their newfound bond might hold more significance than either of them realized. For now, though, Alejandro pushed aside his questions and returned to the present. Diego stood beside him, smiling with the joy of having found a new friend. As they walked together, Alejandro felt a quiet certainty that something meaningful had begun. When they finally said their goodbyes, Diego ran back to his father, who was still busy serving the guests. Alejandro watched Tomas from a distance, intrigued by the man who had raised such a remarkable boy. Tomas appeared reserved, deeply committed to his work, yet there was an unmistakable dignity in his demeanor. He carried himself with quiet confidence, moving with purpose and treating every guest with genuine respect. Alejandro couldn't help but feel drawn to the man. There was a silent strength in him, a mystery that Alejandro wanted to understand. Seizing a moment when Tomas was briefly free, Alejandro approached with a warm smile. "Good evening. You're Tomas, right?" Tomas, surprised to be addressed by the host, returned a polite smile and nodded. "Yes, Mr. Alejandro. How can I assist you?" Alejandro gestured reassuringly, signaling that this wasn't about work. "Actually, I just wanted to thank you. I had the chance to talk with your son Diego, and he's extraordinary. It's rare to meet someone so young and so passionate about learning. You've done an incredible job raising him." Tomas visibly tried to maintain his composure, but a spark of pride lit up his eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Alejandro. Diego is everything to me. I do my best to support him." Alejandro nodded, understanding the weight of those words. "I could tell. He shared his love for stars and planets with me. He's truly special." Tomas smiled, a hint of melancholy in his expression. "He is. Diego has always been different. So curious and full of questions. Sometimes it surprises me the things he knows. I think his mind is destined to reach far, even though, well, our life has its limits." Alejandro paused, reflecting on Tomas's honesty. He felt a deep admiration for the father who, despite his struggles, was wholly devoted to his son's dreams. "You should be very proud of him," Alejandro said earnestly. "Diego has a bright future ahead." Tomas nodded slowly, as if acknowledging the weight of that hope. "I am proud. He's an amazing child. But as a single father, I worry about the future. I do what I can, but there's so much I wish I could give him that I can't. It's not easy." Alejandro was moved by Tomas's quiet strength and his unwavering commitment to his son. There was something profoundly human in the way this man gave his all despite the challenges. Alejandro felt an unexpected urge to help, to ensure that Tomas and Diego could reach beyond their current limitations. Sometimes, Alejandro said thoughtfully, all it takes is a little luck for things to change. And who knows, maybe, luck often appears when we least expect it. Tomas offered a grateful smile, though his expression hinted at skepticism. "Thank you, Mr. Alejandro. I'm truly glad you enjoyed Diego's company. He's spoken highly of you. He's already talking about the new friendship he's made." Alejandro felt a warmth in his heart at the thought. "His friendship means a great deal to me as well," Alejandro responded earnestly. "Diego reminded me of something I had forgotten: the importance of curiosity and the urge to explore the world." Before the conversation could go further, Alejandro's eyes landed on the mark on Tomas's wrist once again. It was nearly identical to his own, so much so that it felt uncanny. Sensing Alejandro's curiosity, Tomas smiled faintly and raised his arm to reveal the mark without hesitation. "My mother used to say it was a sign of good fortune. Funny, isn't it? A lucky sign for someone who's had very little luck." Alejandro smiled back, but this time, he felt a strange sensation. A pang of something deeper, as if that mark carried a meaning far beyond what it seemed. Later that night, when Alejandro returned home, his conversation with Tomas still resonated in his mind. Something about the man, the way he spoke of his son, life, and struggles, had struck a chord within him. Sitting alone in his quiet living room, Alejandro replayed every detail. Tomas's calm demeanor, the honesty in his words, and most of all, the mark on his wrist. Alejandro knew that mark was unique, a distinct feature of his family, passed down through generations. It was a part of his identity, something he had always known. But how could a stranger have the exact same mark? What could it mean? Unable to shake the questions, Alejandro decided to talk to his mother, Guadalupe. Though it was late, a sense of urgency drove him. Guadalupe had always been a source of wisdom and strength, the unshakable foundation of the family. Alejandro trusted her to provide clarity and knew that if there were any hidden truths, she would tell him. Walking down the dimly lit hallway to her room, Alejandro knocked softly on the door. Her gentle but firm voice responded, "Come in." Guadalupe sat in her usual chair by the window, wrapped in a cozy blanket. She looked up at Alejandro with a hint of surprise but greeted him with her warm smile, the same one that always made him feel at home. "Sorry to bother you so late, Mom," Alejandro began, feeling a touch of nervousness. "I had an unusual evening, and I need to ask you something." Intrigued, Guadalupe nodded. "Of course, son. What's on your mind?" Alejandro took a deep breath and recounted the night's events. He spoke about the gala, young Diego's passion for astronomy, and his father, Tomas, a humble and dedicated man. Guadalupe listened intently, her eyes fixed on her son as if absorbing every word. But when Alejandro mentioned the birthmark on Tomas's wrist, he noticed a subtle shift in her demeanor. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and her hands, which rested calmly on her lap, tightened their grip on the blanket. "Tomas has the same mark as you?" she asked softly, almost as if speaking to herself. Alejandro nodded. "Yes, it's identical, Mom. And as odd as it sounds, I felt a connection with him. Something I can't explain. It's like, he's a part of me." Guadalupe looked away, her expression pensive. Alejandro could see something deep stirring within her, as though an old memory had been unearthed. With a heavy sigh, she spoke in a voice tinged with emotion. "There's something I've never told you, Alejandro. Something that has caused me great pain but that I thought best left in the past." Alejandro's heartbeat quickened. He sensed he was about to hear something that would change everything he knew. "Before you were born," she began, her voice trembling, "I had another child." Her words came slowly, heavy with sorrow. "Your older brother was just a baby when a fire consumed our home. The chaos was overwhelming, and in the panic, I couldn't find him. I thought he had perished that night. I searched for him for a long time, but I never found him." Alejandro froze, stunned. A brother, an older sibling, lost in a tragedy, thought to be dead. And now, could it be? But how is it possible? How did no one know? How wasn't he found? Alejandro asked, struggling to process the revelation. Guadalupe shook her head slowly, as if searching for answers herself. "I don't know. I don't know how he survived or where he's been all these years. But, Alejandro, I never stopped feeling his absence. I always hoped, deep down, that he might still be alive. And after hearing what you've told me tonight, my heart tells me it's him." A storm of emotions swept through Alejandro. A brother he had never known existed. A family connection lost and now found. Hope surged through him, alongside a powerful sense of purpose, to reunite his family and heal the wounds of the past. "Mom, I think I found Tomas," Alejandro said softly, reverently. "And from what I've seen, he's been carrying that emptiness within him as well." Guadalupe looked at her son, tears welling in her eyes, and pulled him into a tight embrace. "Then we must bring him back," she said. "We must be a family again." The next morning, Alejandro woke early, his mind still consumed by the conversation with his mother. The discovery of a lost brother was almost too overwhelming to believe, yet the connection he felt with Tomas made it seem undeniable. Alejandro knew he had to act. Skipping breakfast, he quickly drove to where he knew Tomas would be. His heart pounded with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. When Alejandro arrived, he saw Tomas busy setting up tables for another event. Oblivious to Alejandro's presence, Tomas worked with the quiet determination that seemed to define him, paying attention to every detail as if each one carried weight. For a moment, Alejandro observed him, admiration and respect mingling with the deep emotions swirling inside him. Summoning his courage, he approached. Tomas looked up, surprised to see him, and greeted him with a polite smile. "Mr. Alejandro, what a surprise to see you here so early." Alejandro smiled, though the weight of what he was about to say pressed heavily on his heart. "I came because I need to talk to you, Tomas. Something important. Tomas, let's reclaim what was lost to us," Alejandro said, his words filled with determination. At that moment, both men understood their lives would change forever. Tomas exhaled deeply, rubbing his face as if trying to wake from a confusing dream. He looked at Alejandro, his emotions a mix of hope and hesitation, feeling the weight of the revelation settle on him. "Mr. Alejandro, I'm at a loss for words," he began, his voice trembling with emotion. "After losing my wife, all I had left was Diego. He became my sole reason for living, my strength. I've raised him alone, day by day, doing the best I could. And now, after all this time, I find out there's a chance to have a family again." Alejandro could sense the pain and uncertainty in Tomas's voice. He saw that his brother was grappling with an overwhelming blend of emotions: joy, disbelief, and natural doubt. Tomas took another deep breath, shaking his head slightly as he continued, his voice quiet but firm. "I'm sorry, Mr. Alejandro. This is just too much to process. My whole life I thought it was just Diego and me, that we were alone in the world. I'm not sure how to handle this. And maybe, if this is truly real, we need to be certain. We need a DNA test." Alejandro placed a steadying hand on Tomas's shoulder, his gaze sincere and voice reassuring. "I understand, Tomas. This is a lot to take in, and I don't want you to have any lingering doubts. In my heart, I'm certain we are brothers, that this connection is genuine. But if a DNA test will give you the peace you need, then let's do it. Let's clear up any uncertainties together." Tomas fell silent for a moment, letting Alejandro's words sink in. Alejandro watched as his brother wrestled internally with the whirlwind of thoughts and emotions that seemed to surface painful memories. Looking down briefly, as though gathering his strength, Tomas sighed heavily and began to recount a moment that had defined his life. "It happened 5 years ago," Tomas started, his voice laden with sorrow that Alejandro could almost feel. "Mariana, my wife, was on her way home from work. She'd been promoted that day and, as always, called to share the news, her voice full of excitement. She wanted to celebrate, but she had to stay late. It was raining heavily that night, and the roads were slick." Tomas closed his eyes briefly, steeling himself to continue. "Her car skidded off the road and hit a pole. They told me it was instantaneous. But even so, I got a call in the middle of the night, asking me to come to the hospital." His voice faltered, and he pressed his lips together to hold back tears. "When I arrived, all that was left was to see her face, lifeless, and to understand that from that moment on, it was just Diego and me. He was only 3 years old, and he would grow up without his mother. That night, I made a promise to be everything for him. My dreams, my plans, none of that mattered anymore. My only focus was giving him the best life I could, even with all the challenges life threw at me." Alejandro listened intently, his heart heavy with Tomas's pain, but also filled with admiration for the resilience his brother had shown in raising Diego alone. When Tomas stopped speaking, Alejandro let the silence linger for a moment, giving him time to reflect on the significance of what was happening. Then, placing a firm yet gentle hand on Tomas's shoulder, Alejandro said, "Let's take this step together, Tomas. Let's do the DNA test. I want you to feel confident in the truth, and I want Diego to know how loved he is, that he has a family standing by his side." Days later, Alejandro and Tomas went to a private clinic to undergo the DNA test. The process was straightforward but carried deep emotional significance for both men. The moments in the waiting room felt endless. Alejandro observed Tomas, who kept his eyes fixed on the floor, seemingly preparing himself for whatever the result might be. With every passing moment, Alejandro felt the weight of the truth they were about to uncover, a truth that would reshape their lives forever. The days that followed were marked by patience and anxiety. Alejandro dealt with the anticipation quietly, sensing that the result would not just confirm a connection, but close a chapter he hadn't realized was open. Tomas, however, experienced waves of conflicting emotions. The possibility of finally having a real family brought both comfort and fear. He knew how much was at stake. Not just for himself, but for Diego, who would inevitably be impacted by the outcome. Finally, the day came. Alejandro and Tomas returned to the clinic, their steps deliberate, as if stalling for time. Alejandro maintained a calm exterior, a mask of composure that hid the turbulence within. Tomas, on the other hand, was visibly anxious, his hands trembling slightly as they awaited the results. Seated side by side, they waited in heavy silence, feeling the profound connection that had grown between them despite their years apart. At last, the receptionist called them forward and handed over an envelope. Tomas took it with unsteady hands, struggling to open it. Alejandro, seeing his brother's hesitation, gave him a slight nod of encouragement, silently offering his full support. Taking a deep breath, Tomas opened the envelope and scanned the document. Then his gaze froze. The silence in the room became almost tangible, as if the world itself held its breath. Finally, Tomas looked up at Alejandro, tears brimming in his eyes, and a smile of relief and joy broke across his face. "It's positive, Alejandro," he whispered, his voice filled with emotion. "We're brothers." Alejandro felt an overwhelming surge of happiness and hugged Tomas tightly, as if that embrace could erase the years of separation and hardship his brother had endured. In that moment, they were no longer strangers. They were family. They were brothers. With the truth now confirmed, they both knew a new chapter in their lives was about to begin. Guadalupe sat on the porch, as was her custom, gazing at the garden she had cultivated with such love and care. She looked up upon hearing the footsteps of Alejandro and Tomas, a gentle smile gracing her face, as if she had been expecting visitors. But when her eyes landed on Diego, her expression shifted. The surprise was instantaneous. She stared at the boy, momentarily confused about why he was there. Alejandro stepped forward, his eyes bright with emotion, and spoke with a calm yet heartfelt voice. "Mom, I have something very important to tell you," he began. Tomas is my brother, the son you lost so many years ago." A heavy silence followed, so profound it seemed to echo. Guadalupe turned her gaze to Tomas, her face filled with disbelief, her wide eyes searching for meaning in Alejandro's words. Finally, in a hushed voice, she whispered, "My son, you're alive." With tears streaming down his face, Tomas took a hesitant step forward. In a voice choked with emotion, he said, "Yes, Mom, I am your son. I survived. And after all this time, I've come back to you. I'm Tomas, and this is your grandson, Diego." These words unlocked a flood of emotion in Guadalupe. She stood abruptly, her hands trembling as she pulled Tomas into a tight embrace, as though trying to bridge the years that had kept them apart. The embrace was a tapestry of relief, forgiveness, longing, and a love that had endured every hardship, even the pain of separation. "My son, my dear son," she repeated, her tears flowing freely, mingling with the smile that had finally appeared on her face. Tomas held her close, savoring the warmth of her embrace. The embrace of home, of belonging. Diego watched the scene with wide, curious eyes. Seeing the emotions shared between his father and grandmother, he felt an understanding settle deep within him. He knew this moment would change everything. When Tomas and Guadalupe finally released their embrace, Tomas knelt before Diego, his expression tender. "Mom," he said, turning to Guadalupe, "this is my son. This is Diego, your grandson." The sight of Diego, his innocent eyes shining with curiosity, filled Guadalupe's heart with an overwhelming joy. She knelt and hugged him with the same warmth she had shown his father. "Welcome to the family, my dear. It's such a blessing to have you in my life," she said softly. Her words settled over Diego like a warm blanket, affirming his place in this newfound family and signaling the start of a new chapter in his life. In the weeks that followed, the bonds between the family members grew deeper. Tomas, Alejandro, and Diego became inseparable, their days filled with laughter, shared stories, and moments that stitched them closer together. Every gesture of affection became a step toward building a future grounded in love and unity. Alejandro, recognizing the need for stability and closeness, decided to take action. He purchased a spacious home in a beautiful, safe neighborhood just minutes from his own residence. The house was perfect, a welcoming haven with a garden where Diego could play freely and enough space for Tomas and his son to live comfortably and privately. The proximity between their homes allowed the family to visit frequently, strengthening their ties. To ensure Tomas's independence, Alejandro gifted him a car, providing him with the freedom to move easily and enjoy life alongside Diego. Additionally, Alejandro secured Tomas a well-paying job at one of his affiliated companies, giving him the stability he needed to build a secure life for his son. Overwhelmed by his brother's kindness, Tomas embraced this opportunity wholeheartedly, determined to make the most of it. He promised himself that he would give his best, knowing he was finally surrounded by the love and support he had always longed for. As the months passed, Alejandro's gift of a home became more than just a place to live. It turned into a hub of love and connection. The brothers visited each other often, sharing meals and laughter. For Diego, the garden became his favorite place, a sanctuary of play and exploration where his imagination flourished. His uncle, rediscovering a long-lost sense of youthfulness, often joined him. Guadalupe became an integral part of Diego's life, bringing stories of the families past every week. Her tales of Alejandro and Tomas's childhood captivated Diego, offering him pieces of a history that made him feel even closer to them. Alejandro also grew closer to his nephew, often bringing him to his office. Diego was fascinated by the work Alejandro did, especially the projects that helped others. The boys' endless questions about how decisions impacted people's lives were met with patient and proud explanations, deepening their bond. Meanwhile, Tomas worked hard at the job Alejandro had arranged for him. Each day, he returned home to a beaming Diego, whose joy lit up their evenings. Their nights were filled with stories, laughter, and the quiet comfort of a family rediscovering itself. Then came the day of Alejandro's grand charity event. It wasn't just a celebration of achievements. It was a tribute to resilience, family, and love. This time, Alejandro made sure Tomas and Diego stood by his side, highlighting their place in his life. As the event unfolded, Alejandro delivered a heartfelt speech. He shared their family's story, the pain of losing a brother, the miracle of their reunion, and how Tomas and Diego had become his greatest inspiration. Diego listened with pride, holding his father's hand tightly. Tears filled Tomas's eyes as he felt gratitude swell within him. When Alejandro finished, the applause was thunderous, but what stood out most was the embrace he, Tomas, and Diego shared on stage, with Guadalupe watching proudly. It was the embrace of a family that had overcome every challenge to reunite and vowed never to let go again. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more heartwarming content. See you in the next video.